Nieves is a former NYPD detective and says do not...
Everybody's looking for the monkeys.
Yeah. So you
Our smiles, to give you a little bit of a brief on how it goes.
And good morning, good evening to wherever you are out there in the world, folks. Thanks for tuning in to watch yet another episode of Your Pet Detective. I'm Mianus River, and that guy over there is Angel Nieves, former NYPD detective, and now he's still working as a pet detective, but this is what he finds animals, and now he has his own show, Your Pet Detective, and I'm going to get right to the point because our guest tonight is Chris Nagy, who is the founder of Gotham Coyotes. There has been a prolific problem of coyotes invading residences, not inside people's houses, but residences in people's backyards, sort of terrorizing kids playing in the yard, dogs, cats, the whole 9 yards. And Chris is going to tell us why it is happening and what we can do about it. And Angel, I think you have some tape.
Yes.
Okay, let's roll that tape.
And it's been going like this lately.
Okay, it'll work. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to go straight to our guest. But we will make it happen.
Okay, well, I'm going to do this. I have to go back to it.
Okay, so you know what? Why don't we introduce the guest, and then we can go to the tape once we get that straightened out. So let's bring in Chris.
Hello, Chris.
Hi.
Hi, Chris. And I want to make sure that I don't mangle your title. You are Dr. Chris Nagy, correct?
Yeah, that's what they tell me. I have a PhD in biology with, I focus on ecology. So don't ask me about mitochondria or anything like that. But I studied, for many years, I studied owls in New York City parks, and then more recently moved on to coyotes and other things.
Well, owls are going to be a separate show. Today, if I may, I'll address you as Chris.
That's fine. Yeah, please do.
I think I have to show this little slide.
Okay, all right. So you want to show that now?
Let's see if it comes out.
Okay, so let's give it a try. If that doesn't
I
work,
found this on the web for. They see if it comes out. Check it out.
I'm sorry.
okay, we actually have some video. And
Here it goes. We're getting a lot of technicalities here, but now that we're in this little doggy here, Chris, tell us where this is at.
This is I think a little experiment we did across the city, but this one I think it's from Pelham Bay Park in the northeast corner of the Bronx, and that little contraption you saw. That was part of a larger study across the whole, many places across the country. And you can imagine you have some places that are urban and some places that are a bit more in the wilderness and rural areas. You put those contraptions up on some cameras and you leave other cameras with no contraption, and you can hopefully, the paper's in prep right now, but we're hoping to see if there is a difference in how coyotes that live, say, in an urban area respond to something strange and new. And so that's what that, the tomato plant stakes with the rope is just something new that the animals encounter. And often, even amongst individual animals, you can see this difference. And you could imagine it with children. Some are curious and some are a bit more fearful of something new. And the hypothesis was that perhaps the animals that are in the city, the ones that we see are the ones that to some degree have some ability to survive there. They have predilection. You could call it personality if you want, that perhaps is different than those that do well in like the countryside and the wilderness. And one of the things that with other species such as raccoons, you see a lot more curiosity and the willingness to explore something new that the animal hasn't encountered. You see that in urban animals more than wilderness animals, and you can probably guess what that is. In the city, trying out new stuff often leads to food and other things, whereas
I'm listening.
going somewhere new in the wilderness leads to something bad for these animals. So that was the hypothesis, and I don't. People analyzing the data, we're not finished yet, so we don't know what happened. But it was an interesting study, and it will hopefully be used to. The ultimate goal is to use something like that to at least characterize, say, an individual animal that, as you were saying, may be causing a problem, or people think they may be causing a problem. And we can talk about what that means. Maybe this is a way to kind of diagnose that. I could put one of these up. If you get one that's really curious, then that could be something that indicates maybe it may be a problem, or at least maybe more willing to approach people, and it may be something where we need to dissuade it from doing that sort of thing.
Well, Chris, can you give us a rough idea of the coyote population in the metro area?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I would also say, not to criticize your introduction, but it's definitely, I wouldn't characterize it as a problem. All of the encounters I've ever had with a coyote has been a coyote running away from me. And statistically, I could give you lots of comparisons. You're more in danger owning a dog than having a coyote roaming your neighborhood. So, and I'm not saying that to make everyone afraid of their own dog. I'm saying it to, or opening a bottle of champagne, or buying, getting candy from a vending machine. All of those things are more dangerous than having a coyote around your neighborhood.
Well, but in all honesty, if I can interrupt you for a quick second, there was a post in a group in a Riverdale forum about 3 weeks ago. A mother was walking with a young child in Riverdale, closer to the area over by the river at night, in the evening rather, and sure enough, a coyote came out of the bushes and lunged at her child.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was able to scare that coyote off. But I think that is not a one-off. There have been other incidents of kids playing in the backyard, dogs in the backyard, and the coyotes kind of come out of nowhere, and the dog gets attacked, the child gets attacked. Now, I agree with you. This is not an everyday occurrence. But it does happen if people are concerned about it. Particularly
I want to, use whatever expertise I've gathered to help educate people about how to minimize those things. One of the real challenge is I can tell you that there's a very low risk, but I definitely can't tell you there's no risk. And so, again, one step that I do, which you saw my spiel a moment ago, is to at least try to help people put the actual risk in context with the rest of their lives. You get up every day, you drive a car, or you get on the subway. You've already, basically the way I'd put it is, if you're out walking your dog in the Bronx, the coyote's not what you need to worry about, if there's something to worry about.
Very true.
So And again, I can't tell someone that there's no risk, but there's lots of things you can do to minimize your risk. And the other thing I would say is that this phenomenon is not just New York City. The coyotes are in literally every other city in the continental U.S. They're not in Hawaii yet. So this is not the reason New York is interesting is because, well, I'm a New Yorker, but it's the latest one, and we have this opportunity to, like, kind of as a researcher, document it and observe it and experiment with this happening as it's happening. A lot of times the coyotes already showed up, and then you start studying them. But here, our attempt has been to watch coyotes move from Westchester, which they've been numerous in Westchester since the 80s, and then they eventually made their way through the Bronx. And then, as we've observed, they've gone over the water into Queens, and now they're actually a few dens on Long Island. And it's interesting to, as an ecologist, that's an ecological phenomenon, an event that we're documenting. So scientifically, it's interesting in that way. But the other thing is, I'm an applied wildlife biologist, where the stuff I'm trying to learn and the questions I'm trying to answer are there to help people deal with these things and live with them and manage the wildlife in our area. So, definitely myself, our team, other city agencies, state agencies, we do a lot of outreach, a lot of education. There are, what I've been most recently seeking to do is to find these sort of stories that, like you told, and to find some way to actually get the hard facts of them. Not that the person made something up, but anyone not used to wild animals, seeing one, everyone has a different way to interpret some event, ranging from, I thought this was the most spiritually awakening experience I've ever had, to it was the most terrifying experience I've ever had, and all it is possibly an animal walking across the street 20 yards away from you.
Well, how many? But let's get back to the to the original question.
Yeah, sure.
Give us a rough idea of how many. What is the size of the coyote population in the Bronx?
In the Bronx. Well, so I can't give you a hard number. It's hard to count them. But we can we survey the city a few times a year with camera traps. We focus on many of the parks, because that's really where you'll find the animals. Although with coyotes, there could be many coyotes living where I don't know who knows where. I only can tell you what's happening in the places where I look. That said, I'm fairly confident I know where most of the coyotes are. And so that said, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parks that I know of in the Bronx that have coyotes. Now, some of those parks are small and they're close to each other, so it's kind of like one family of coyotes uses all of those. But generally, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, I don't have this off the top of my head. 1, 2. There's 5 areas in the Bronx that I know of where coyotes are breeding regularly, most years, where they have pups, and then those pups leave, and then that pair that lives in that usually larger park they have the resources to breed year after year successfully.
But a rough estimate, would it be a ballpark number? Would it 5,000 or
no?
Okay.
We're talking somewhere, because they have up to 7 pups or so every year. So if it just depends what time of year you're talking about, how many coyotes there are. When I was talking about breeding territories, that's more.
How many would you say?
Top range would be 30. I mean, I don't even think there's 30. So we're talking in the teens, 20.
Right. So that's practically. I mean, 30 coyotes. Come on, you got to think 30 coyotes in the Bronx.
That'd be high.
That's I think that's such a low number. I mean, honestly, I'm glad that you mentioned that number, because I think that people have this concept that the Bronx is being overrun with coyotes, and that there are so many more. And 30 coyotes is almost laughable. I mean, they're more skunks than there are coyotes
There's definitely more raccoons
and
and
raccoons.
things like
So
that. There's probably more deer in the Bronx,
probably
like the
more
deer than
deer.
there are
So
coyotes.
that
I mean,
makes
these animals are territorial. A pair will usually be effectively monogamous most of their lives, and so they'll defend a territory. And that in the urban areas, those tend to be a little smaller. The rule of thumb is like 1 to 2 square miles for a single pair of coyotes, and that's on the low end. So, there's only, I don't know how many square miles the Bronx is off the top of my head, but if you were to just draw boxes of that size, there'd only be so many, and they're generally focused around some wooded or vegetated, undeveloped, effectively parkland, and they certainly go out into the city at night and forage around
Okay,
and
I
move.
found this on the web for. They certainly go out. Check it out.
What's the lifespan of a coyote? How many years?
Yeah, I mean, the average is pretty low, but that's really because so many die early in their lives. The hardest year for a lot of different kinds of wildlife is that first, when they leave their parents, usually in the fall, when they're hatched / born / whatever in the spring. Often that's a standard for a lot of animals, birds and such, and then they'll spend, like, say, the summer with their parents, and then they have to go find their own territory, their own food, their own mate sometime in the fall. And so that first winter is like brutal for those owls I mentioned earlier, for all kinds of animals, including coyotes. So a lot die then. If they are to make it to their first birthday, their survival rate goes way up. And so an old coyote would be like 10 in the city. And that one video you had, if someone is watching this and rewinds the recording, that first reddish and gray colored coyote that you saw sniffing at our rope and stick thing was at that time at least 10 years old, and you can see he looks pretty old if you watch that tape.
Right.
And I think that was one of the last recordings we had of him, and he lived in a very small little park in Queens, and we could very easily find him if we put up one of our cameras, and then suddenly nothing. So I assume he's dead, and he would be the first picture of him ever that we had, and we didn't even take it. A resident gave it to us. Was from 2009, and we tracked him from 2011 to 2019, and then lost him. So that's a perfect example. He didn't have a mate, but he seemed very healthy, lived for many years, didn't cause any problems, and then eventually everything perishes.
I'm sorry, Angel, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, when you're saying about cameras, this is one of the pictures to view with the camera here.
Oh yeah. You can call those. We call them camera traps, or trail cameras, and wildlife cameras. But they're you strap them to a tree just like this. They have basically a motion detector. It's actually like a heat detector, and if something warm moves in front of it, it'll take a picture. And they can run for months. If you happen to see one out there, please don't disturb it. You get pictures of any animal that's like bigger than a rabbit or a squirrel or something. If it walks into that zone, if it's a bigger animal, it can see them out to like 40 feet or something. But usually raccoons and such, you need to be 15 feet or so. And so it's a great way. You put a bunch of those up, you come back in 2 months, you got pictures of animals, you can get a good idea of what animals live where.
What about the potential of coyotes crossbreeding with domestic dogs? Has it happened, and if it has not happened, what are the possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting you asked that, because the last paper that we put out was actually we were able to get some genetic samples of a particularly large individual, and it turned out he was a first generation dog and coyote hybrid. So I thought it was very unlikely, and it still may be. This is just an example of one. There's a number of reasons why dogs and coyotes aren't readily crossbreeding. They certainly can. The young are viable, and just like a dog and a wolf, wolf, coyotes can all interbreed in terms of their genetics and physiology and raising the young. But there's a lot of kind of behavioral barriers that get in the way. One is dogs usually aren't out in the woods. We had more feral dogs in the city, I think, back in the 70s or such, kind of before my time. There's a lot fewer, so those opportunities are fewer. But it can happen. What I've heard, I'm not an expert in this, but what I've heard is that, for example, male dogs won't take care of a den. So if you're a wolf or a coyote, you mate and you have your pups, and the female is in the den with the pups for a good period of time while they're very young and are on milk, and the male has to go provide for the whole family. And then eventually the pups are big enough, the female can come out and start helping with the foraging. But for that period before that, the male has to feed everybody. And dogs have sort of lost that instinct in many cases. So that won't work.
But technically, I mean, from a biological point of view, let's say
they absolutely can.
Through some nefarious breeder, that it could happen via artificial insemination.
Yeah, and that's where you get. So I'll back up a bit. All of the coyotes in our area, in the entire East Coast, are actually a mix of a couple different species. They're mostly, on average, coyote, about 60% or a little more, 60, 75%. And then they also have wolf background. So that means generations ago, one of a given coyote's ancestors was a wolf. And that happened as the coyotes came from the Great Plains east to our fair land. They went up around the Great Lakes, and at that point interbred, and this is over many, many generations, interbred with eastern wolves up in Ontario, and then now they're carrying that wolf heritage south. But that's generations ago. There are no wolves in southern New York at all. So you're not going to have that. There's also dog ancestry happening mostly, as I understand it, because wolves have so often been interbred with dogs in the way that you described. And so any given wolf has a decent chance of having some dog background. And if that wolf were to interbreed with a coyote, that coyote gets some dog background. So that's sort of the baseline. And they all have it. And it can be from, 25% down to 10% or so mix of wolf and dog in any given coyote, and that we have here on the East Coast. And that leads to some morphological differences. They tend to be a little bit bigger here on the East Coast than they do out in New Mexico or something like that. But that one I mentioned was an example, and we can tell the difference, or at least my colleagues at Princeton can tell the difference between, no, it didn't have a wolf great-great-great-great-grandfather, or it didn't have a dog great-great-great-great-grandmother. This guy's mother was a dog and his father was a coyote, or whichever way it was. I don't remember the sex of the different parents, but it was a first-generation cross, which is a much different story. And we hope to test other coyotes that we get samples from to see if this is something that's occurring more and more. Because for sure, I mentioned a few of the kind of challenges, but for sure, when they start going out into Long Island, those first few founders, they're gonna their pool of their dating pool is going to be very limited for them, and a dog may if you take what you can get in some ways. It may happen more and more, and I was initially quite skeptical of that, but we found one, so I might be wrong.
Well, if one exists, then there's probably more, or the potential of more. Angel, I've done all the talking. What about you? I mean, I'm sure you have a lot of questions you want to ask.
Well, actually, a lot of questions that I had, he did answer. And, me as a retired detective, I did a lot of check on you. So, I heard a lot of stuff that you said. I just listened to your lectures and everything. It's it amazes me a lot is because I myself experienced a coyote back in like 98, 2000. I was coming out of work like 1 a.m, something like that. And I was coming out of the highway and exit 23, which is the Henry Hudson northbound. So I got off. It's around Riverdale, and I saw this. First, it looked like a husky,
Yeah.
and it was running low. You know, it's not like a regular run. And then it stopped, and I looked at it, and I got off the car. The dog is like a car length away from me. It wasn't far, but I put the spotlights on, and it stood there looking at the spotlights, but it looked like he was looking at me. And I was so upset because in those days, I didn't have the camera. I had a Polaroid camera.
Right.
I had no film for the Polaroid, and I'm upset. I'm looking, but I didn't. I stood out of the car. It was like so impressive. You know what I mean? And the tail was like a tail of a squirrel. That's the best way I will explain this. Bushy, and the legs are skinny. You know, and like I mean, I'm thinking about it, and I'm still like, is wow. You know, I mean, I saw it again, another one, but in Westchester, up by Valhalla, around there. There's a cemetery, and I saw him booking, running as fast as he can inside the cemetery, and that was impressive because I went around looking for him. I wanted to see him close. I was in my car, and I couldn't see him. You know, but I've seen so much wildlife in New York City, especially in the area. You're talking about raccoons, and you're talking about, I mean, raccoons and the skunks and the golden eagle and American eagle. I saw by the Washington Bridge. It looked like a flying angel. Oh, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, this is New York City.
Yeah.
You know, and even those vultures, the turkey vultures. I mean, bouncing around. I mean, it's impressive. And the funny thing is, back in '86, when I moved northern to the Bronx, I'm from the city. I'm used to the shootings and all that. I grew up in there. I grew up in Harlem. And I got scared waiting for the bus early in the morning because I hear honking. A pack of honking, and there were geese.
Yeah.
And I got scared of flying geese. You know what I mean? That's one introduction to me. And then after that, I got used to it. And what you're doing is very impressive to me. That's why I reach out to you, because it's like so much things that we have here, and we have to respect it, and we have to know what to do for if you don't want to it go into your neighborhood, to your yard. I mean, what you have to do to prevent it is not to scare them off or anything, but it's, well, I know you could tell us.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in that moment where you have a coyote in a place you don't want it on your property, then you can scare it away. And in most cases, they'll run. They're very skittish. When you have these sort of things like the story you described, that coyote to feel comfortable to approach a full-grown, adult person with a kid or a dog on a leash or something, to get that close, that coyote has learned. There's been other things that have led to that. They don't start out, let's go up to this thing that's 4 times as large as me, standing tall, making lots of noises. And so that's where really the you don't want them, they'll learn whatever we teach them. So you don't want to teach them, come near our buildings, come check around our gutters, lick the grease trap in our grill, check our garbage cans, and they'll do that maybe once or twice. And if they don't find anything, they'll move on because they're looking everywhere for food. And if they find something, though, they might try it again, and pretty soon you've now taught them that this is an opportunity. If I go near that house, maybe they leave a dish of cat food out for their cat or the feral cats or something. And now I can have a meal. And now this area is mine. And if someone's in there, they may take my food, even because they don't know that person put the food there. They just say, that's mine. And so they'll get comfortable like that. And so, for any animal to live in the city and in any urban area, it has to become used to, or we say habituated to noise, the presence of people. And you can do these very simple experiments. If you go upstate and you try to see how close you can get to a squirrel without it running away, and then do that in Central Park. and so that you have this habituation, and they have to. No animal could survive or even tolerate living in the city if they didn't have some ability to get used to people being around, or else it would just run around all and lose its mind. And so there's that which sort of has to happen, and in some ways it's good because the animal will be calmer if people are nearby, and not act defensively. But then there's this other, I see it two different things. Other scientists may not agree with me, but there's this other thing where you get this positive reinforcement where now not only am I just tolerating this noise, avoiding it if I can, but if I can't, I'll live with it. Now I'm getting to a point where I'm seeking it out. I'm looking for people to give me sandwiches on the golf course. I'm looking for these garbage cans. And that's where, people ought to be careful around their houses about what they do, about the environment they set up for wildlife, not just coyotes. You don't want a skunk in your garbage either. You don't want rats in your garbage either. So a lot of the things that I say, oops, I hit something on my computer. A lot of the things that I'm saying are things you ought to do anyway, even if there weren't coyotes around. In particular, how people monitor their pets. You ought not to let your dog run free on the trails in a park, even if there weren't coyotes around. There's skunks. You don't want to clean skunk off your dog. There's raccoons. There's rats. All these things can have rabies, for example. There's cars. There's all these dangers. And so if you let your cat out, you're rolling the dice for that cat's life, even if they don't have a coyote around. And so a lot of what I tell people about coyotes, they'll say, well, I can't let my dog run around anymore. I'm like, no biologist would ever tell you it's okay to let your dog run around, even if there weren't any coyotes. So that's one way to look at it. If you're being a responsible pet owner to begin with, basically you're not changing anything about what you need to do with coyotes around. Now, again, if you have this has to operate at a community level. If one person is following all the rules but other people are feeding coyotes and that sort of thing, then they could get in trouble, even though it's not their fault. So it really does need to be a neighborhood effort. Right. And that's sort of one of the things I try to do. The Parks Department does a lot of this outreach to communities about what they can do. And then the last thing I'll say is, I have a dog and a cat, and I love them very much. And I live in Westchester. I have a little more room. But in Riverdale, it's somewhat suburban. People have yards. And so I would say, put up a fence. They can be expensive if you go full on chain link fence, all this stuff. But I just have, it's called deer fencing actually, but it's soft kind of plastic fence, and you buy those this metal posts to put around. And I think it looks fine. It's actually hard to see from a distance away. But I like that better because it's not that expensive, but it's also kind of floppy. And wild animals, and even your cat or whatever, can crawl up a stiff chain link fence in many cases. But this floppy plastic fencing, they can't really climb it. And the coyote can't really climb it. So then put that up. If you're having problems, there's some reason the coyote wants to get in, because there's a lot of effort to dig under a fence or try to get over it. And so I would tell people, well, now you have to think about what reason would a coyote have to want to dig in under my fence? If that's the case, that's probably not going to happen. And so then you think, well, something's attracting it in. Do I have, again, the garbage, the pet food, all that kind of stuff? And then you can address those. And so, the state agency has a rubric for, 90% of the time, this stuff is just a matter. There was a study done by Cornell years ago where they surveyed people and said, have you ever had a negative interaction with a coyote or negative experience with a coyote? And some people said yes, some people said no. People who said no, they said, well, what was the nature of this experience? And the number one answer was, I saw one. And so part of my effort, and I definitely have a position and an opinion on this, is to, like, one way I feel that I can turn the dial a little bit is saying, well, let's change that to, you can take away all those negative experiences for people. That's a perception problem on the human's part. I think there's definitely legitimate cases where you have, coyote attacks or coyote bites, but they're very rare. And in those cases, there's many means to remove coyotes if that's legitimately happening. And the state and the city both have like rubrics for like this coyote behavior, this response. And the very last line is, coyote, attacks a person, kills or attacks a pet on leash next to a person, acts aggressively in the daytime. There's lots of like really bad behaviors that we have not seen in New York City yet, but they do occur, elsewhere very rarely, but they do occur where you remove that coyote, and remove it, we mean lethally remove it. But there's like 6 or 7 rows above that where you can address it in different ways. But that option is there if that's necessary. And the philosophy there is, we can't, and nor do we want, I think, as a society, to exterminate coyotes from the city. But you do occasionally may need to remove individuals that have learned these bad lessons. So that's the way I look at it. And that's the way the state and the city generally look at it too.
Well, okay. So, something we've gotten a lot of information, and we're sort of getting towards the end of our show.
But before we do, I want to show this cute little thing. But before we do show this cute little thing, let's talk about donations to your.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you'll see in the, I don't know if this shows in the final product, but my day job is at the Mianus River Gorge. So you can go to this website and then you can link to the Mianus River Gorge, which is so Gotham Coyote .org is technically a collaboration with many different people from many different places. I sort of am the main person, but we work with people from the Museum of Natural History, from Fordham University, Columbia. I'm going to forget some, Pace, Hofstra, lots of different groups on Long Island, SUNY Purchase most recently. And so it's all a collaboration. But the place I actually work is the Mianus River Gorge. They're the ones who pay my salary and allow me to pay my rent. So if you ever want to donate, you can donate to the Mianus River Gorge. And even if you wish, you're more than happy to. You can give a general donation, or you can say this is for coyote research or for Gotham Coyote Project. And I'll make sure whatever those funds are helps us buy cameras or batteries, or help support a student that's doing research. We support a lot of high school students and undergrad and graduate students doing different research projects on New York City wildlife. We've always got to buy batteries. So those sort of things, we'll definitely make good use of it.
Now, if people, one of the questions, if let's say if people want to report sightings, rather than report them in, neighborhood forums, would it be helpful to you if people went to your website?
100%. Yeah, we have a form there. We're also in contact with we have a very good relationship with the Parks Wildlife Unit, New York City Parks Department Wildlife Unit, and the Natural Resources Group and the park rangers, all those folks. If they get a report of coyote, they usually share with me. I'm a researcher, so I will use that for like ecological, knowledge. If you have a problem, you should call probably 311. If you have a real problem, call 911. If you're hurt or your dog gets attacked or something. But that's, again, very rare, but it's not impossible. So definitely call 911 if there's any injuries involved. If you want to know, like, if you feel like that sort of behavior is on the horizon, where coyotes are being seen during the daytime, they're not running. I could go into that a little more. There's sometimes a year, like when they have pups, if you happen to walk by near the pups, you may not even know it. The adults will watch you. But if it's something more than that, call 311. You can report it to the park rangers, and they'll look into it. We have a form on our website. If I get something like that, I'll absolutely send it to the Parks Department too. But if you're just interested in the biology of it, if you want to help the research, you can tell me for sure on our Facebook, on our website. But yeah, I wouldn't loop out the official agencies are the ones that will do any kind of advisement on removal or what you should do. evaluation about whether there's a problem. So I more advise city agencies. I wouldn't want to take over their job.
All right. Well, and with that, Angel, you get the last word.
Well, Doctor, thank you very much, Chris,
Chris.
for giving us all the knowledge. I know it's a lot more because you did it for 20 years. But people, if you see any wildlife out there, don't call them. Don't try to pet them. Don't try to feed them, because that's where the real problem is, when you feed them. And pick up your mess. Okay? And out of that, I have to show this. This is so awesome, gorgeous. I love it.
Oh yeah, that's the pups playing.
Those are the little pups playing out there. It's awesome. Anyway, it's time to go.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nikki. So we will have you back on again because it's the weather's getting warmer. New buildings are being built in areas where they probably shouldn't be, and it's disturbing the habitat. So, we're going to see those little friendly creatures encroaching more and more and more into residential areas. So we will have you back.
Yeah, happy to anytime.
All right.
All right.
Super fun. Thank you.
Thank you.